So now to sort of the substance, and I'm taking the son's prerogative as the last speaker, and going to talk a little longer than my 5 to 8 minutes, but we'll still get you out to the reception. Alan simply was the kindest, gentlest, sweetest, smartest, and wisest man I've ever known. And I could stop right there, but I have a lot more to say. As many of you know, Al was humble, and he would not have wanted all the fuss about him, but he would have understood. He used to enjoy the birthday parties at the labs or the office that you all threw for him, not because it really meant anything to him, but he knew that everyone else enjoyed themselves, enjoyed the cake, enjoyed the camaraderie. And as you've heard little bits and pieces of, he was really funny too. He had a laser-like sense of humor, and he'd use it particularly at occasions like this, where something would come out just right on target. So a great example of that really has to do with what Dina told you when they named the conference room at the experimental immunology branch after Al. His reaction to that, his comment on receiving that honor, was that he wasn't quite sure why he was getting it. That honors like that are usually reserved for people who are retiring or who died, and he didn't plan on doing either. So that's sort of a very classic example. Like all of us on the planet, my father played many roles, many more than perhaps some people. You've heard a lot about some of these and not so much about others, so I'll try to fill you in a little bit. My father's childhood's been detailed in certain venues, such as the wonderful book on my mother by Allison Davis that NIH really put together. Mike Gottesman was involved in that. I'm very grateful, and Francis, I'm very grateful. But my father's childhood was not easy. He literally grew up in the back of a candy store in Queens during the Depression. There wasn't much money. And when there wasn't a lot of food, there was always the merchandise, which led to a lifelong series of problems with his teeth cracking, caries, etc., and a total obsession with brushing his teeth, which my wife understands and has heard about. Grade school was hard for many reasons. In the mid-1930s, with the Nazis coming to power in Germany, some of his classmates of German descent would routinely beat him up on the way to school merely because he was Jewish. I'd like to think a lot's changed in our country since then, but I'm not so sure. Now the anti-Semites have automatic weapons. And most tragically, my dad's father died in the candy store when he was 14 or 15 years old. He never really spoke about it much, but clearly an enormously traumatic episode, leaving his mother, Florence, an incredibly sweet and saintly woman, to raise him and his sister. He didn't speak much about his father except to say how much he knew that he was loved, and his father tried so hard to make him happy and do everything he could for him. Alan was a brilliant student, though, and he entered college when he was 16. He knew that his way to a better life was through his brain, and his mother and his sister made sacrifices to let that happen. He always wanted to go to medical school, but again, anti-Semitism reared its ugly head. He was turned down by every medical school to which he applied. For example, Rochester, where he was an undergraduate student at the time, had already filled its quota of Jews for the year, as he was told. He was waitlisted at Long Island College of Medicine, which is now downstate in Brooklyn, and was only accepted towards the end of the summer before he started, when he'd already begun to look at engineering schools. What an incredible loss to American medicine that would have been. Alan, of course, was a great student, made it through medical school with flying colors, won all kinds of awards, played jazz trumpet to make some money on the side, as you heard, hence the music that you heard coming in. And after medical school, I could tell you lots of stories that he told me, but there was residency initially in medicine at Massachusetts Memorial in the days of the giants. We could talk about some of the people who were his mentors there, wonderful stories. Pathology residency, a commission in the United States Public Health Service, a stint at the Centers for Disease Control, and finally to NIH in 1955 for the next 60 years. You've already heard a lot about Alan's professional roles, but for the science geeks among us, I just want to take 1 minute to emphasize that he was a terrific scientist with multiple science and nature papers and major discoveries in virology and cancer biology. The breadth of his scientific interests, if you look at his publications, was really astounding, with papers in virology, cancer pathology, fundamental cell biology, but also endocrinology, air pollution, leprosy, trypanosomiasis. So this incredible breadth of scientific interests. This breadth, as young PIs are always taught, probably cost him some level of scientific recognition. He didn't have that focus that's always drilled into the young scientist. But it gave him the skills to run the vast intramural and extramural biology programs and the Cancer Centers program because of this vast range of understanding and interests that he had. And Dina's right, in a very real sense, it took more than two smart scientists to match his breadth of knowledge. There are lots of great stories about his science. Maybe we can talk some at the break, like how the Epstein-Barr virus could have been the Rabson-O'Connor virus, but for the package handlers in London. But we can talk about that more later. He had great stories. Alan is a husband. As many of you know, Alan met Ruth while they were both in medical school, thanks to a wonderful pathologist named Donald Feldman, who introduced them. What a seer Donald was, and how grateful I am to Donald. Those of you who knew Ruth and Alan knew what their relationship was like. You saw them go home together after a long day, walk the campus together on the weekends. You saw them at the Kennedy Center, reading journals and pink sheets until the first note sounded. And they did love those concerts. Every Saturday for years, including without fail New Year's Eve at the Kennedy Center with the Trout Quintet by Schubert. You'll hear a little of that at the end of the program. Ruth and Alan were a perfect couple. Barbara, my dear wife, always says of them, one breathed in and the other breathed out. So as a father, I know you're waiting to hear this. Well, as Lou Stout once told me, I hit the jackpot of the parent lottery. My father was a wonderful father. I'm sure it's not hard to surmise that at this point. Not only was he my dad, but in also many, many ways, my best friend and my advisor. Most importantly, and this is what he did with young scientists too, he let me be who I was. He knew the pressure I put on myself because both of my parents had put that kind of pressure on themselves too. And he would always say, just do your best and you'll be fine. We love you anyway, no matter what happens. And you can imagine what a relief it was for me to hear that growing up with Ruth and Alan. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. He was happy. He knew who he was, and he didn't need to live through me. When he met other colleagues who had kids, he would always let them talk about their kids. He knew it meant a lot to them. And when it came to me, he would always just say, Arnold is doing fine, and let them continue to talk. My dad was my first and best teacher in almost everything. Doug, he taught me to fish. And that means including a rather unusual childhood of reading genetics when I was 10, looking at slides when I was in my early teens, a trial of bench research when I was in high school with Fran Legali, actually, his technician. And he taught me to value each person I meet and to take care that they felt better after we were together than they felt before. So that is something that he did with everyone, and I just treasure. And God, he loved this campus. He and Ruth knew every nook and cranny of this campus, and there was a time when they knew every person who worked on this campus, and they loved and admired and respected each person. Now, Alan wasn't perfect, and things weren't always blissful. It's true for everyone, and definitely true for him. There was a residue of fear in him, fear of being left alone, as had happened when his father died when he was a young teenager. He had a hard time with me leaving NIH, and for the NIH lifers among you, I learned that there is a life and a world beyond this campus. And parenthetically, please remember that when you make decisions about grant funding lines. He had a very hard time with Ruth's terminal illness, as I know you all know. He kept that hope, but it was so hard. But he learned and grew and accepted everyone. He really liked people, both in general and in specific. And as you've already heard, I think, from a couple of our speakers, the oral history, the interview with Alan is available on the web, actually. Steve Katz sent it to me. Mike knows you can probably Google it. And what you see when you read that, we heard that he used the word wonderful 36 times in like 20 pages or something. You'll see that he liked everyone. Even while acknowledging their quirks and shortcomings, he'd keep coming back and say, but I really liked him. I got along so well with him. One comment made with the greatest praise and kindness by a remarkable neuropathologist named Marius Valsamus that some of you may know really hit my father. Marius once said to Alan, quote, "You're too good for this world." This amazing compliment really agitated my father. He didn't want to think about not being part of the world he loved so much. Another idea that he found really bothered him and he found offensive was that one could be too nice to be a leader. He found this offensive, as I said, and as I've moved through my life, I understand why. There is no such thing as being too kind or too nice. In fact, what Alan knew is that the very best leaders are kind, and that it takes a much stronger and a much wiser man to be a kind leader than to be a bully. You would have appreciated that. Today is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. As Ira said, it's a very public goodbye, an acknowledgement of the fact that my dad is no longer physically here in this body. But I'll tell you, I actually refuse to say goodbye, and I can't say goodbye because my father's in my DNA. He's in all my epigenetic marks that he helped put on my DNA through how he taught me. And to use a word we've heard recently, but so true, he's indelibly part of my consciousness and my soul. And I've now come to believe that it's good that we don't say goodbye completely, because the world desperately needs who Alan was, and it needs the values that his memory still enlivens in us. There's a phrase that some wonderful colleague of his gave to my dad as a plaque to put on his wall, and I don't know who did, and if you're out here, please tell me. But it was a sentence with quotes around it, "I wish you all could be more like Alan," with exclamation points. And he had it proudly on the wall. In the beginning and at the end of our life, each of us embodies an energy that we call love. And if you don't believe that, go look at a newborn baby. It's just pure love there. And as we get older, more and more stresses and strains, difficulties in life, and some people that becomes very clouded. For Alan, he continued to radiate that love through his whole life. He lived his love. He lived his love of Ruth and of me, his love of knowledge and wisdom, his love of helping others, his love of every single one of you. And he radiated that love to the very end with a warm and a kind and a spontaneous smile that you saw lots of pictures of, even to the last days of his life. If we can be more like Alan every day in every one of our interactions, the world will slowly but surely become a better place. Thank you for joining us here today, and bless you all with the love and the kindness that Alan was and still is in our hearts and our memories.